Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending today's Back to Business webinar, where we're going to be talking about hiring during a labor shortage. I have my colleagues and friends, Scott Payne and Cody Schwan here, and I'm going to kick off by letting these gentlemen introduce themselves. Scott, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. So Scotty Payne, I'm a principal partner and senior account manager with Greystone Associates. We specialize in working with family-owned funeral homes all over North America. Been in business for over 20 years, and we specialize in the development of staff. We work with the business management, succession planning, human resources, basically everything to do in helping funeral homes run a business. So collectively, we serve through all of our client firms roughly around 90,000 families in a calendar year. So we don't know everything, but we've seen quite a bit of everything.
Well, Scott, we appreciate you being with us today. We're excited to learn from you and your insights, and we'll turn it over to Cody. Cody, I think you're on mute.
Of course I am. It's the day of technology. No, we haven't learned anything from the last 2 and a few years. Boy, oh boy. Thanks, Tim and Live Oak, for having me. It's great to be here with you and Scott today. I am the founder and principal consultant for Everlearn Associates. We're a boutique consulting agency serving North America, and we help funeral homes similarly to Scott at Greystones with any of their needs, from employee development to leadership development, right down to financial and marketing efforts. So we are happy to be here and to contribute today in the ways that we can.
Absolutely. And Live Oak Bank is just pleased to host this webinar alongside ICCFA. And it's just an honor to be able to have Scott and Cody with us to learn. We serve approximately 400 customers on the loan side currently. And since inception, Live Oak has funded almost $1 billion of funeral home loans across the entire United States. And it's just been an honor to be able to work exclusively in the funeral profession, both on the funeral home and cemetery side. And excited today to hopefully add some value in an area that I know the three of us agree is a very hot topic today. There's a huge need related to hiring, but there's an underlying responsibility when it comes to hiring, and that's managing people, that's managing the organization, because without that, hiring is going to be an uphill battle. So again, we're pleased to be with you today. If you have questions, please add those to the chat as you work through. As we work through the material, if you have a question, please post that, and we will keep an eye on the chat as that comes through. So please do that, and we'll try to answer those as we go, and we'll address any of those that we don't get to near the end of the session. So please, we encourage you to participate as much as possible. So if you're wondering, we don't have slides for this material. This is a panel discussion, so this is meant to really involve the experience and ideas from both Scott and Cody and myself, and then engage any questions you have throughout the material today. So with that being the case, I'm going to kick this off with kind of posing a question that I think is relevant to the topic to really get us started thinking about what is our true responsibility as an owner of the business, right? What are the true responsibilities in the workplace related to people management? And Cody, let's kick this off with you. Can you share some of your thoughts related to what our true responsibility is as a business owner related to people management?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that, funeral home and cemetery operators have, they wear seemingly a million hats and change those hats multiple times in a day. But I profess that the most important one that you have to wear is how you lead people. People are at the core of what we do. And without them, oftentimes on the front line of our operations, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And so at Everlearn, one of the main principal tenets that we really focus on is that people first, always mentality. I think far too often, my corporate experience, we served about 25,000 families across the country here in Canada. And we often sat around the boardroom table as executives and had great ideas, brilliant minds. But we would often be back at that boardroom table 3 months later or 6 months later, banging our heads against the table, wondering why that thing hadn't worked. And what we realized really quickly, and which is why people first culture is really important, is that we were often not consulting the front line. We were often not asking the frontline stakeholder, how does this affect what you do? Is it even a good idea? Does it work? How could it be improved? And so that ongoing consultation with and conversation with your front line is critical. It means carving out space that sometimes we know is at a premium, but making sure that team meetings, performance management, all of these things are central to the organizational culture, because without them, there's a massive gap, a huge disconnect, or the potential for that disconnect with your people.
Absolutely. Scott, what are your thoughts there?
No, absolutely. I'm going to echo a lot of what Cody said. And, development from the top down is very important. And what we see is a lot of leaders actually choose to develop in their staff instead of actually developing in themselves. And ultimately, our failure to develop ourselves as leaders will have a huge impact on the culture of the business. And, if we want the team to follow the positive culture, we have to actually create that culture. And it's more than telling people what to do. It's working alongside them. And what we're seeing is people want to go to work where there's a positive culture. There's leaders that are involved in the business. They really don't want to be at the funeral home where the leader's nowhere around, and that culture component is significant in all that we do. I don't know about everybody else, but I choose to be at a workplace of choice. I want to work there. I want to thrive in what I do. And again, it starts at the top and it works its way down.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think when we think about this and we use the word culture, every time I hear that word, my mind wants to define it, right? And there's so many definitions of culture. And I think every business, the definition is going to be different. And as an owner and an operator in the funeral profession, when you think about culture, the culture starts with you, and some things that I've learned just over the years of managing a team myself is that a big part of culture is understanding how to relate to each individual personality in your business. And in order to relate to them, you've got to spend time with them, as Cody mentioned. As Scott mentioned, you've got to invest in yourself. You've got to become aware of bias that you may not even have realized you have. And when I say bias, I'm not talking about excluding anyone because of the color of their skin or anything. I'm talking about bias towards how you think people should be doing their job, for example. You've got to be able to be flexible in understanding where somebody is, their ideas, and allow them to incorporate their ideas. And to me, that is a part of the foundation of your culture. If you're not allowing people to share, if you're not allowing people to prove you wrong and how to do things better, that's going to be a bumper stop to culture in your organization. And I see this time and time again. And so I would encourage you today, if you're an owner and you haven't invested in your people in terms of time and you haven't invested in yourself, I think that's a great starting point to be attractive as an employer to people coming to work from you. Any closing thoughts on that, Cody, related to people?
Yeah, I mean, to that end, oftentimes when at least in our experience, when we talk to owners and operators, they think that investing in culture means investing in training and development externally from the organization, and that's great. Listen, there's lots of great opportunities to learn and to develop and to further our skill sets, but at the end of the day, culture starts right inside your organization. And I always say to leaders, it's really not about you. It's important that you're setting the tone, but it is about the majority. It is about the broader sense of culture. And part of that is understanding what people's pain points are. And those are sometimes hard conversations to have. I always say sometimes it's a rockier road, maybe, which is why most people don't want to travel it. But it does open sort of the floodgates for communication to flow freely. And organizations who are successful have really open, transparent communication within all levels of the organization. And so, I just close by saying it starts inside first before it goes outside.
How about you, Scott?
Well, yeah, both of you said two big words: personalities and communication. Most people are unable to determine how people's personality, how people are wired. Why are they wired the way they are? and how do we communicate with them. As leaders, we have to be able to adjust ourselves to be and to understand who that team member is, and we have to have the right tools to do that. When it comes to culture, too many people are saying, oh, we do a birthday cake once a month for all the May birthdays. Okay, great. Is that really creating a culture, or is that just creating an expectation? So we have to take culture beyond the lunches and the birthday cakes, and we have to really make it a foundation of who we are as individuals, and most importantly, as a team.
Yes, so some key takeaways there is investing in yourself, having the self-awareness as an owner that you're not an expert in leading people. I'll never be an expert. It's a continuous learning environment when it comes to being a leader. And so investing in yourself, investing in your staff, listening to your staff, allowing them to communicate with you, and leaving bias at the door. And bias comes in the form of many things. When we think about diversity and inclusion, it comes in many different forms. And don't think that it's just one form, and be aware of that and allow other people's ideas to influence your business. And I think that you'll become an attractive organization to many, many people. We could probably spend 2 hours on that one question, right? Because there's a lot of easily, right? There's so many frameworks we could talk about related to managing people and identifying personality differences and performance and culture, putting people in the right box, right? So maybe we can create something like that. But we wanted to move on to kind of the next area, and that's related to how we leverage non-licensed staff to take pressure off of licensed staff. All right, this is a big topic. So Scott, we'll let you kick off this time. What are your thoughts related to leveraging people in the organization the right way?
No, and I mean, this is always very touchy depending on the licensees that these non-licensed folks will be working with. But what we know is in today's world, it's harder and harder to find a quality licensed professionals. There's more people retiring in funeral service, more people retiring than getting in. So what we have to start doing is say, hey, what are they doing? What are our licensees doing that they don't necessarily need to be doing? So we've been advocating for about 6 to 7 years that we need to be leveraging folks to help take pressure off of our licensees, which also impacts the culture of our organization. Okay. If you have a funeral director that's meeting 100 families a year, plus they're doing embalming, plus taking out funerals, plus they're ordering everything, they're doing their own obituaries, we need to take some pressure off of them so we can retain them in the future. And part of this is creating a culture is it's not my family, it's our family. Okay. And when we create our family culture within an organization, leveraging non-licensed staff is much easier.
Very true. Cody, what are your thoughts?
Easy. Yes. Scott summed it up. I mean, really, we have to get back to reevaluating the role of licensees. So often that, the depth and breadth of the role and responsibility has evolved so much that when we actually stop and take a look at the plate in front of the licensee, it's overflowing. If you had to title or put hats on a lot of these things, oftentimes they're graphic designers doing a lot of cards and those kind of things. They're experts in creating videos. They have to, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I'm talking outside of the traditional role of, seeing families and the technical work that we do. This is far beyond that scope. And oftentimes then we sit and wonder why a licensee is sort of facing the face of burnout and not really loving their work anymore. And it's simply because the work that they had sort of signed up for has evolved far beyond the job description. And I know that, listen, there's going to be small locations where it's just not possible to diversify the roles and responsibilities that much. We have these catch-all individuals that sort of have to do it. But as soon as you hit that threshold where you can start to consider these sort of things, I think it's a really important conversation to have instead of just letting it exist the way it does, and then wondering why when turnover starts to happen, or in terms of recruiting, the attraction magnet maybe isn't as strong as it once was. And that is not only internally in our own operations, but I think the profession at large has to really take a look at this and just understand what can be migrated away from those licensees, and how do we evaluate that.
So when I hear this, I hear a couple of themes there, right? I hear a responsibility for the owner to identify the structure of the organization and how different people are being utilized. But there's also this theme of how our funeral or licensed professionals treat the unlicensed professionals. And in terms of that culture we talked about, in terms of respecting that role and making the unlicensed individual feel just as integral to the organization as the licensee. So talk about that some. I know both of you have seen situations to where this has maybe eroded away some of the culture of the organization. Do you have any examples or insight related to that piece of it?
Do you want to go,
Scott, first?
Yeah, sure. We're working with a client right now, actually, a fairly large operation. We've been with them for a long time. We sort of work with them proactively in the work that they do. But when we started, we came to them because they had a culture problem. Their turnover had gone from almost non-existent to fairly regular. And the introduction of just one-on-one conversations, just one-on-one coaching conversations, which I can hear people saying probably right now, oh my gosh, that just takes time. I think we're at a point where it's time you can afford not to take, to be honest. I really do think that these one-on-one conversations get ahead of the shift, because once that shift has started to happen and you haven't been ahead of it, shift is going to manage you instead of you managing the shift. So enabling these one-on-one conversations, as we did in these with this owner that we're working with, and they've got a team of about 40 people, really got into the minutia of those conversations way ahead of the employee getting to a break point where they had to come to them and say, hey, this has got to stop. Something's got to shift, because then everything that happens thereafter is just reactive. So introducing these proactive practices into the business, yes, they take time, but the dividends of investing that time are incredibly powerful when you start to see things start to turn around, when in fact turnover is really, really reduced, if not non-existent almost. And that magnetism that you create from a recruiting and attraction standpoint just amplifies incredibly, because not only do you have a thoughtful organization from a leadership all the way through the entire team, but you also have a culture that's really strong, where employees feel heard and seen, and their voices are considered in the organization's success overall.
That makes a lot of sense. Scott. So, Scott, you obviously were excited to share something there too. So what thoughts did you have? I think Scott may have frozen up on us. We'll wait for Scott to join us again. But I do, Cody, to your point, I think there's a responsibility. This keeps going back to the owner and driving, the focus in terms of making time to train the staff, spend time with the licensed funeral professionals, help them understand what they need to delegate, and then how to empower the non-licensed professionals to help take part in the value of that service. And that's key. Not one particular person having ownership over the other, I think is crucial. Scott will be back with us shortly. Next question inside of the topic related to how to utilize staff. What do you see as some common challenges, Cody, related to the non-licensed staff supporting the licensees just in general? Is it more of a competition inside the organization? Is it what have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Tim. It can often be that. And listen, some of the things that you're going to have to consider if you're really thinking strongly about amplifying a positive culture within your workplace is breaking some of these stereotypical norms that exist. And I know there are teams that everybody works harmoniously together, and that's amazing. Your goal then is to become a AAA team instead of just the A team. But there's a lot of people that operate in that B and C range where, they have really great times in the organization, and they have times that, in general, either individuals or en masse more kind of suffer through the pains of growing and operating, and things like COVID and the pandemic and, all these things. Change is never going to stop. But it's our responsibility as leaders to really focus on how we manage that change. Like I said earlier, how we manage the shift. Yep. And so yes, I think historically there has been this sort of separation, if you will, of licensed, I won't say versus unlicensed, but that the license of having gone through the educational system and having that versus not, and maybe being a part-time or para support individual in the organization, there's always been sort of this line in the sand. But much to Scott's point earlier, when we talk about understanding how people communicate and then understanding how, in fact, we dovetail our communications to be really, really strong and positive, the same thing can work. The same thing can be considered when we're talking about how unlicensed staff support licensed staff, and how when they come together, it actually relieves both of them of sort of extraneous duty or responsibility that they can then shine in their own lane. So directors and can shine with what they do, and the the unlicensed staff can shine doing what they do, whether it's graphic design or literally para funeral support, like body removal and transfers and so on and so forth. So, it just takes the time to focus on it to really get a handle on it, and then those are the things that just over time you remove some of those barriers that may exist between those two sort of camps, if you will, that we often see.
That's great. And Scott, I'd love your insight on this. So when we talk about different roles, hospitality has become a pretty popular subject related to roles in the funeral home. And, there's been debate. There's some states that I think are moving towards this, to where you have kind of a separation of roles, more hospitality focused and more licensed, specialized focused on planning. I'm sure you've seen this play out. What's your take from your perspective?
No, absolutely. And, we are hospitality specialists, right? We just do it whenever there's grief involved, and we do it better than anyone else. And what we know is this works very successfully. We actually have several clients that do this. They have done this for years, but there was a clear expectation from the very beginning. This is not replacing licensees. This is simply designed to support licensees. I would much rather a licensee have more time demonstrating care in the care center, doing embalmings and cosmetics, or sitting down at a planning table with a family, than worrying about following up on obits, death certificates, social security documents, and all of that. And one of the things that I've asked people all over the country is, when you went to mortuary school, did they teach you to send obituaries to newspapers? Did they teach you to order a casket? Did they say, hey, here's how you need to order an urn with personalized engraving? No, they taught us how to care for people, living and the dead. So as long as we set that expectation from the very beginning, we actually see firms that do this well, and families are actually extremely pleased with this, because now they're saying, wait a second, I get more than Cody. I actually get Tim, and I get Sid, and I get Chris, and I get Jonathan, I get Sandy. I get all of these other individuals to also support me. Now they start putting value. They start realizing the true value that we bring, right? So we've got to get over the days where funeral directors are trying to do it all. As hard as that may be, funeral directors are amazing because they have amazing administrative support. And administrative support is amazing because they have some pretty amazing funeral directors. So now we're simply saying, how do we bring them together so there's a better quality of life in and out of the funeral home? I don't know about Cody. I don't know about you, Tim, but we continuously hear people saying, I don't want to be here after 5 or 6 o'clock. And we know that funeral service is not an 8 to 5 job, but when we can leverage our non-licensed folks, everybody's able to get out of here at a reasonable time on a consistent basis. Think of what that does for culture. Think of what that does for your family time. To me, it's just priceless.
Absolutely. And anything you can do to avoid burnout. It seems since COVID, the data suggests that individuals are just tolerating the potential for burnout much less, and they will change careers to avoid that, and they will pursue a balanced work life. And if you're not, as an owner, facilitating that in your organization, it's going to manage your business for you. And you're going to find yourself short on staff, and you're going to find yourself burning out. It reminds me a lot of actually the loan process, right? If I had to underwrite and close and service all of my own loans, we would do a fraction of the loans we do, and all of my customers would probably be very unhappy with me, and I would be unhappy with me. Okay. It's not possible. And so I think that we've got to really kind of extend the chain in the organization to allow people to be experts in their field and drive that passion. So far we've really hit on the people management, being in tune with your people. What are their goals, aspirations? Where are they at in their life? Do they have 3 kids running around at home? They're going to be more sensitive to their schedule than maybe somebody who's at home by themselves, right? You won't know these things until you spend time, right? And then from there, can you craft and put those people in a position of where they're empowered and excited? And does that alleviate stress on another part of the organization? So you can already see how these first 2 topics are really starting to gel together already and creating some culture or a culture inside of your organization. And one comment that Scott and Cody and myself agreed on in this was that we can manage the shift, or the shift will manage us. You have to choose. That makes me think about cremation. We learned that lesson with cremation, didn't we? I mean, if you didn't adapt to cremation and embrace it and learn how to manage it, it was going to force you to. And how many businesses have we seen struggle with that?
Well, they're still struggling.
Still struggling. Right.
Still struggling.
Yeah, so, I can remember once, Tim, I was brought down to Kentucky to speak at a conference. This was quite a few years ago. And I remember the trade show the night before I spoke, sort of walking around and meeting a bunch of people and asking about their cremation rates to get a sense of, the audience I was headed into. And most people hovered around 2 to 6 or 7%. And there's ones that were at 6 or 7 were almost losing their minds because it was a big number for them. And I was coming from firms where we were operating in the 80 plus percentile. Canada has been over 85% for, I lost track of how long. It's at least probably a decade. So again, it's about managing that shift. We're lucky, even in a lot of the firms that I managed when I was on the front line in the profession, in funeral service itself, where we ran months at 100% cremation. But that was still serviced cremation. So, revenues were still strong. Average revenue per call was strong. Our people still felt fulfilled by being able to offer, services to families that were meaningful to them to celebrate the life that was lived. So we didn't, oftentimes when we hear 100% cremation or 80% cremation, we just about keel over thinking, oh my God, that must be terrible. It is terrible if you don't manage it. If you allow it to manage you, it can be awfully detrimental to the bottom line of your organization, ultimately your livelihood and the livelihood of your teams. But when you get ahead of it and you manage it proactively, that is where the real magic is. And sometimes getting ahead of things proactively is tough because we all know time is a precious commodity most of us don't have enough of. But sometimes we have to find that extra hour just to think about these things, because sometimes they are upon us far faster than we expect them to be.
For sure.
Absolutely. And, I think about this in terms of cremation so much because I believe that the current hiring challenge is the new cremation challenge. I mean, I think the cremation challenge is going to exist for a while. Businesses are going to be transitioning for a while. But something that's popped on the scene recently is like, oh my goodness, we're having trouble finding licensed funeral directors. We're having trouble finding people who want to work in our business. And I would probably say that could end up being a bigger challenge than managing to cremation. Some very valid points. So we've kind of talked about the internal piece for the first half of our session, really getting the house in order, right? And being prepared to go external. So let's talk about the external piece a little bit. And we do that by talking about how do we really advertise this? Are the ads boring? Do they not really do a good job at storytelling? Are we not connecting with the emotions of the people? Are they outdated? So what energy are we putting into advertising programs? Scott, since you got bumped off, I'll let you kick us off with this one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sorry for those technical glitches. So,
okay.
And you're exactly right. We have to put energy into this hiring process. I was working with a funeral home back in 2019, right before COVID started, and their goal was to build a brand new location, open into 2021. We were talking about ramping up staff, and we really took their help wanted ad and we actually made it where you wanted to read it. Right? It was no longer funeral home been in business since 1825, 3 locations. It was so much more about actually being a part of something greater. And it really didn't resonate with me of how powerful that ad was until this firm hired a licensee from Washington State, and they're on the East Coast. And what was interesting is the ad attracted that individual to look at their social media platforms. It encouraged them to look at their website. It encouraged them to do research in our profession. And think of how many funeral homes they passed up from Washington State to the East Coast in the state of Pennsylvania simply because they were attracted to the ad. So we have to be putting energy into the ad. We have to tell them why they should work for us, not do you want to work for us. We talk about, we have shoppers, right? With that mix shift, we're getting more shoppers every day. Folks, we have shoppers with people interviewing with us every day.
Absolutely.
Right? We have to put as much energy into selling our value, selling our culture, selling our team, selling our community in these ads and then in person, as we do when we're talking to a family that's calling about burial or cremation.
Absolutely. Cody, any thoughts on the
Yeah, I would say I agree with everything Scott said. And what I would add is a giant cautionary: spit it across the screen right now, flash it in red lights, hit it with lightning bolts. Doesn't matter. Call attention to it. And that attention is, you cannot advertise a culture that you desire. You have to share the one that you have, because if you advertise a culture you desire as opposed to what the reality is within your operation, you attract people to something that doesn't exist. And your exposure and risk to turnover just magnifies it significantly higher. So it's why I think it's why we started and structured our questions questions and answers the way we did, because it boils down to that culture piece. You have to think about the culture, because in order to be, to have that as a recruiting magnet, as I've said before, if you don't like your culture, you've got to change it. You've just got to put work into the culture, because that risk of turnover is just too great. Sadly, when you have too much turnover, and I've also had a client who experienced this, too much, that starts to broadcast far louder than any ad you could ever put anywhere. Because funeral and cemetery services, no matter where you are, either north of the border or south of the border, it's a pretty small community. Even though, there's lots of us in it, it's pretty small. And so word travels fairly quickly, and people don't want to be, as we said, in the beginning, Scott, Tim, and I have sort of all reiterated this, which is no one wants to spend as much time as we do at work and not enjoy the work or the culture or the place that they're working, especially when it's at the sacrifice often of being at home with the people we love.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I've been fortunate to be a part of some profession-wide conversations over the past month about the very topic of having a tough time creating demand for the workforce. And I really believe that there's an opportunity for each of you on this call to market to your communities by sharing what it is you do. I think that this is one of the few professions in America that doesn't educate the consumer, the family, the person, the individual in college on really what being a funeral professional is and what they do. We leave it to their own imagination. And I will tell you from experience, I'm not a funeral director. I've been working with funeral homes now for going on 10 years. And prior to lending to the business, I had my vision of what a funeral professional was. And it was the person standing at the door welcoming me in and shaking my hand and standing there for like 3 hours in one spot. They didn't show all the work that went into it before the service, the planning with the family, the phone calls with the family, and how integral they were in helping that family have a great experience, right? So just for me as an outsider looking in, I think there's a huge opportunity for each one of you on this call. If you're in need of professionals in your funeral home, Get on the TV, get connected to the community and storytell, share some stories of what your funeral professionals have done for families. And I think that's the missing link. And Scott and Cody, I don't know if you agree with that, but it feels that we don't communicate to the community on what we can offer.
I would agree with you completely. We don't. And I mean, if we go into different cultures across the globe, being in funeral service is taboo. It's not something that you do. It's not something looked upon. And I think in our communities, it's the same way. And I really appreciate what Sid just said, that, we don't even sell funeral service, much less being a funeral director, right? Mm-hmm. We have to really think about, how are we selling ourselves every day? We have one of the greatest professions in mankind, and we have to protect it. One other piece I want to add is, again, we can have the great ads, we can sell ourselves, but what energy are we putting into responding to these possible applicants, right? Too many people are saying, well, I called them and they already had a job. Well, when did they respond? Well, I've had the resume for a week. When people are looking for work, oftentimes they're going to start talking to individuals. So we have to make sure we have the right individuals assigned to follow up with these applicants. And then another component, talking about culture again, when you bring that applicant in, have them do more than visit with you, the manager or owner. Have them go out to lunch with your team. Let them actually see the culture that you are hoping that you have, right? Mm-hmm. And let your team, because the team's the one that has to work with them. We want to make sure our team is in sync with the person being hired. The other component I like about our team interviewing them is, if we have to pass on an applicant for a reason and the team gave us support, they still know that they had a say in it. Yeah. They know that we're out there still trying to find help for them, and we're not going to settle for just somebody with a license. So again, what energy are we putting into it? Let's get our team involved.
Yeah, Tim, I can weigh in. I know you come from the unlicensed perspective. I come from a licensed perspective. I've been a licensed funeral director and embalmer for 25 years. And the definition of what specifically the funeral director does has evolved over time so much. And so I don't think, if you asked everyone on this call, let alone broadened your search, to send in what the definition of a funeral director is in one paragraph, I don't think any of them would look the same. It's going to be geographically different, and environmentally, in terms of the volume that the volume of families that you serve, the size of your team, all of that is going to change. But the easy place to start is to distill it down to those core sort of essential ingredients that you need based on your needs in your operation. That's the most important thing you can do. And I agree with Scott, and I would add on to say that we also, if we want to Sid's point, speak into, for instance, high school students, well, we have to think where high school students are. High school students are not watching TV, not at least local TV anymore. They're not, they're not reading the newspaper, let alone magazines. They're very much a digital generation, and we can love to hate that if we want to, but the reality is that's where they are. So if you want to be part of the conversation, you have to be where the conversation is happening, which means stepping into zones that are maybe not traditional for funeral homes to be advertising, and things like TikTok. Is it the best, most exciting thing for you to dive into? Probably not. Probably scares the heck out of a lot of people because it's where the young kids are, and not some of us older guys where we spend our time. But the truth is again, I said in the beginning, leadership is not about us. It's just not about us. It has to be at the broader intersection of who works for us, which is the front line of our teams. And so if it means having to learn a new technology and spend some time there and get creative and be a little uncomfortable, well, we all know that just outside our comfort zone is where the real learning happens, where we really are able to stretch ourselves. And that may sound cliche, but it's also true.
Yeah, you hit on something there, Cody, that I think we often forget. And that's, in America today, the young people are driving the markets. When you think about TikTok, when you think about social media, young kids today have a lot of influence over what their parents do, the activities. And kids today have a lot more access to information to where they're making decisions about their career way earlier. And there was a comment, and that was said in the chat. It says, we don't even try to sell funeral service as a professional service-oriented career. Most high school graduates don't consider funeral service. We need to change that mindset, right? There was another comment followed up to that. I was a teacher for a decade. I entered this field to continue helping my community. So that's related to young people, right? So I think we've got to do a better job at positioning what the career is, what it does for people, but then we've got to be able to adapt and align with what that individual's goals are. And not say to them, yeah, you're going to work 9 hours and then I'm going to wake you up at 2 a.m. to do a removal. And then I'm going to make you skip the weekend and work all weekend. You're not going to get anybody in today's time.
Absolutely.
You're just not going to find that. So I think this is really, really important stuff here. And I think if you're not committing a portion of your budget to marketing and storytelling, and you're not committing a portion of your time to investing in yourself and your team, you're already behind the eight ball. So as we kind of move external, let's talk about the interviewing process, and then we'll come back and hit performance management. Because to stay external, let's talk about the interview process, right? Interviewing and hiring employees can be daunting, but how do owners manage whether or not they're hiring the right people? So Cody, with you, are there some tools or things that you can share that can help our owners understand, or some quick tips to identify the right people?
Yeah, I think two sort of surface immediately. One of them, but both of them have been around for a long, long time. But I don't think they're employed as often or as frequently as they could or should be. And the first is behavioral based interviewing, which is really making sure that you are asking the right questions that ensure the applicant can walk the talk. Oftentimes we say things like, what got you into funeral service, and why would you like to work here, and what's your best quality? And we rarely follow up questions with, tell me about a time when, or can you share with me an experience you've had that you've demonstrated that and it's worked well? Have you not deployed that and it hasn't worked well? Talk to me about that. And so that behavioral based interviewing is critical, because a lot of people can dance, if you know what I mean. And I'm sure you've all met these people where you interview them, you hire them, and a month in, they don't seem to be the same person anymore. Yeah. And that happens. So is it foolproof? No, it's not. Nothing is really foolproof, but it certainly reduces the opportunity for that to happen, because you spend more time in an interview really trying to get to the heart of the qualities and characteristics that this person not only says they have, but can demonstrate through their shared experience in their employment journey, that really will lend itself to you knowing whether that is actually maybe true, or you smell some distruth. And the second thing that's really important is to use tools that are at your disposal, things like hiring assessments or communication assessments. These are great. I've used communication assessments since the very start of my career, and they have been instrumental in helping make sure you're hiring the right person to complement the team. And by right person, I just mean understanding their communication style. Is it the right fit? Their personality style? All these things are really important to consider, because most importantly, everyone on this call is now going to be focused on culture. And once you strike that nerve of a really great culture, you want to do everything you can to protect it. And one bad hire can totally disrupt that entire effort. It's wild to think that it can take months and months and even years and years to build a really strong culture. And that one person who comes in 1 month can sort of turn it upside down. But I've seen it happen time and time again. So those are just two tools. I'll turn it over to Scott to add a few more, but behavioral interviewing, asking the right questions, really getting to the heart of who someone is and understanding what their values are and how they demonstrate those values. And then assessment tools in hiring, communication, and personality, I think are instrumental.
No, and Cody, I agree 100% with you on what you said there. Last year, 2022, we administered over 800 of these assessments that you're referring to alone with our clients. And we're literally trying to say, hey, let's take the emotion out of hiring someone, right? Because we get so stuck in, we need somebody. Well, you don't need somebody with a pulse. You need somebody that's going to contribute to the culture and the team you already have in place. Yeah. We've always heard we're trying to put square pegs into round holes. Well, that doesn't work. So these assessments really help us. But then that behavioral interviewing, dig deeper. I really appreciate when they're actually shadowing for a day. Get them in there. People can dance all day long. People can talk, and people are going to overperform and people are going to underperform different assessments. But I really want to see them in how they respond to a client. How do they work services? How do they work around our team? Is something really important. The other component is we can't discount the importance of still going back and doing background checks to help us minimize issues. I bring up background checks with people and they're like, why do we need to do that? They're good people. They go to my church. It's not about they go to your church. We're simply, again, trying to make sure we hire the right people for our business. The last thing I'll say is we really, as a profession, we as owners, we as managers, we as leaders, we really have to stop saying we have a labor shortage. Okay. Because it's just, we're not out there looking for the right people to help fill voids. We're very much a complacent profession where we've done things a certain way for so long. It's very hard for us to think differently. And we've all heard the definition of insanity many, many times. And I don't know about you. I don't think we can afford to be insane for the next 10 years, because I'm not sure where we'll be if we don't really start thinking out of the box on this hiring component and hiring the right people.
Yeah, Scott, I want to just add to that because I think you raised some really great points. When we think about how disruption affects an industry, essentially you have two axes, and you have the value proposition in the current environment starting to go down while demand is seemingly staying steady and or increasing. And we can understand how, an organization like Uber comes to be, where, taxi cabs aren't maintained well and they're not available and they're really expensive. And then all of a sudden there's this gap in the value that is so seismic that someone new can enter. And, oftentimes, at least funeral professionals think, well, that's Uber, that's Airbnb, that's Netflix, that's Facebook, that, these are far removed from our environment. They're not, actually. They're not. We're seeing more and more technology enter its way. I don't know if many of you are subscribed to, a lot of the funeral and cemetery supplier newsletters, but the conversation around AI has exploded in the last 4 months. And there are already suppliers that have integrated AI into the things that they do. In years past, that would have taken years to implement, just to get in front of consumers, to test it, to be ready. And now it's happening like that. Absolutely. And so that same gap can happen when the value that you provide as an employer is not meeting the need, and the demand or the availability of people goes down. All of a sudden, we're at that point when something has to give. Something has got to give, because you as owners who are on this call, you also can't do everything. You can't see every family. You can't embalm everybody. You can't print every card. You can't finish every file. You can't order everything that you need. It's just not humanly possible. We know that. That's why teams grow, because the demand and the need increases. But the truth is that we may have to also look, to Scott's point, it may not be a labor shortage. It may be a culture problem and a definition of what we do and how we do it problem. And so really spending time reinvesting in the overall operations in funeral and cemetery services, I think, is going to be a critical conversation over the next, I probably used to say 10 years, and now I'm saying 5, and now I'm even hesitant to say 5. I actually think it's, it's going to be a lot closer than that. Otherwise, I think there's going to be some disruption in our space that we were not expecting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is so important, this piece, because let's talk about the financial impact of this for a second. I myself have seen a dramatic decrease in margin over the past 10 years in this profession. Okay. And I was looking at business financials today and seeing compressed margins. Okay. And what I noticed about these firms, these funeral homes, is that they're trying to hold on to the same number of staff. They're trying to hold on to the same staffing model, while yet their cremation rate's going up and their average revenue per call is creeping down. So to your point, Cody, yes, I do think it's time for us to improve our marketing and improve how we interview and how we attract people. But I think it's probably more important that we start being open to changing our model. And and utilizing individuals that may not be licensed to do more of the things that they're allowed to do in the funeral home per your state laws. You know, if it's me in this, I'm not trying to hire anybody yet. I'm trying to see how to increase my margin by utilizing the staff that I have first. And when I know that I have fully maximized and been creative around that, then I'm looking to hire make a strategic hire. And so to our point, I'm not sure how much we're doing that. And just based on the conversations I'm having with owners today, I'm not seeing a lot of that ingenuity yet. So I think there's a lot of room there. Scott, do you have any comments there?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, we have to do more with less, and we're working less services. We're doing a variety of things differently. We're meeting more minimalist type cremation families. So the days of a director saying they're meeting 75 families a year because they've always met 75 families a year, those numbers are going to have to change. Terry made a comment, think sometimes the assessment tools can be wrong. And what I always like to say with that, absolutely, an assessment tool can be wrong if someone takes an assessment and they're in a mentally unhealthy state. But what we know is if you take the correct assessment and you're in a mentally healthy state and you take it again in 5 years and 10 years and you're still in that same mentally healthy state, your assessment's really not going to change. Okay. But if you're a basket case now, or your applicant is a basket case and they take it again, or vice versa, it's a different person. So, you get out of the tools what you put into it. And if we put correct energy into the hiring process, we put correct energy into the tools, it's amazing what works out.
Yeah, there was another comment by Chase talking about AI related to the obituaries, right? And the builder that integrates with their case management platform. Well, really what that's done, that's reduced the requirement for an individual to spend as much time doing that. But it's also empowered the family to have more of a personal touch to that. Well, I think we have to think about that same technology in other areas of the business. Right? I was standing in the airport in line at a store, and when I got to the front, I was expecting a person, and I had a screen to make my order of what I had in my hand. But all the people that were working were actively making the coffees that people had ordered. Well, they were maximizing the people to do the things they needed them to do the most. And I don't think we need a screen at the entrance of the funeral home yet, but I think that there are some ways for us to get creative and to think around this. So this is great. So before we run out of time, I want to finish up with getting back inside the house for a minute. And that's talking about performance management, which I'm very passionate about. I know you guys are, and it's an oversight in every business, not just a funeral profession, but every small business. Cody, why don't you share with us what your opinion of performance management is and why is it important?
Yeah, I think beyond important, it's essential. I don't think anymore we can get away without having this, mostly because team members want this. Employees want to have they want to have performance management, even if sometimes out of the gate they say they don't. One of the things that we do with organizations when we start to work with them is a complete cultural assessment, where we sit down with team members and understand what their pain points are and what their skills are and things they like, things they don't like, all those different things. Mm-hmm. And consistently, time and time again, with a high degree of, unscientifically 99%, but it's really high in these environments where people say, where there is no performance management, we want performance management, some form of it. And a lot of owners and operators say, okay, I relent, I'll put performance management in, but then it's a once a year program. Well, once a year doesn't work anymore. That's old school. We got to skip that step, and you've got to get into more frequent conversations. And it doesn't often happen in one silo. It often is a multi-prong approach through one-on-one quick conversations through the week. And I'm not talking about like casual conversations. I'm talking about structured conversations. They don't need to be long, even 10 minutes in length, 5 minutes in length, if that's all they can be. And then a more frequent overarching performance management program that enables that open and transparent communication that we see being at the heart of so many successful organizations. And oftentimes I think when people hear performance management, they think, oh my gosh, that's so daunting. That's such a big, but that's why organizations like Scott's and mine exist, is, to help people who may not be able to see quite the direction they need to go, to be able to partner with someone who can help provide that framework and that structure and that leadership coaching. Because we also understand from the seats that Scott and I sit in that leaders and owners' plates are more full than they've ever been too.
Mm-hmm.
And it is way, way, way better to think about these things ahead of time before the problem or the issue or the challenge lands at your feet, because we also know through studies that stress kills our creativity. So it means that we default to the path of least resistance, which is often the thing that we know is the easiest or the fastest way to what we believe is a solution. And that isn't the case at all. Those solutions usually don't work. They're what I refer to as Band-Aid solutions. They might work for a little while, but the Band-Aid falls off. You really have to be thoughtful about these things like performance management, and they really have to also be born out of the front line. How do they want to be managed? What do they want it to look like? What would they like to see? What is the frequency where they would like? And come to some sort of either majority or consensus around those sort of things, and then just do it. Just do it. Stay committed. That consistency over and over again is really what wins over on the front line, and really institutes a successful performance management culture where performance, good and bad, opportunities to grow, as well as success being recognized, is really the foundation again of great organizations.
That's all really good stuff, Cody. Thank you, Scott. What's some of your thoughts related to this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had an hour to talk about this in general. So, yep. And one of the things we must remember is it's all about performance, not sales. Right. So many people think when you start talking about performance management, here they go, they're going to teach us to sell a better casket or a better urn. It's so much greater than that. Mm-hmm. And we are strong believers that this performance management actually starts at the onboarding of a new team member. And ultimately what happens when we bring a new team member on, we basically go through all the legal paperwork with them. And we said, hey, we did really good. We got Sandy onboarded today. And then we basically let Sandy run with others that may not really be doing the best job that we want. So we have to be very clear in setting the expectations, okay, from the very beginning. The other thing is we have to manage without emotion. Too many people have performance management and it's based more on emotion than it is anything else. And Billy Bob's worked for us for 10 years or 40 years or 35 years. He does a really good job because he got a thank you card years ago. It has to be more than that. You need to have the correct tools to take the emotion out of it, to help you manage customer satisfaction, to help you manage revenue generation, and ultimately to help you manage internal feelings about team members as well. There's other assessments that you can do, 360 reviews internally to see how people are doing. So the last piece with performance management is that accountability component, right? We can say we have all of these systems in the world, but if we never hold anybody accountable for things to our expectations, we're really just wasting our time. And as leaders and managers, as owners, now we're losing credibility with everyone else. So it has to start at the very beginning. It has to be consistent. It has to be factual, not feeling based. And everybody in your team has to believe it because that's the culture that you're creating.
Yeah, this is great. I took away a couple of points from both of you that I think are important and I've seen work out well in just my time. And that's providing data-driven facts. Because that adds credibility to your case. If you're sharing with an employee an opportunity for them to get better, an opportunity for them to grow, share data. Don't just share your opinion. And that's where the 360 reviews come into play, I believe, to where if there's a consensus among your peers of what your manager is sharing with you or you're sharing with your team, it's really hard for them to refute that. And they're going to want to adapt. And you're going to see some opportunity there. So I believe that's ultimately very, very important. But if you're not making time and spending time with your people and being consistent with accountability, you're not going to have the respect. And the last thing I'll say is that employees expect you to share with them where they can get better. I'll be honest, if you're never sharing with your team members where they can improve at the right place in the right time, then you're going to lose credibility. They know they're not perfect, and they know there's likely an area they can get better. And if you're never offering that, you could be losing some credibility because they're going to see you as not being honest. So the last quote that I want to read to kind of cap this off was by Robert McNamara, the former American Secretary of Defense, said that brains like hearts go where they are appreciated. Sharing feedback of an opportunity for growth without helping someone understand what they do well and how you see that they add value to the organization is going to be like talking to a brick wall. So if you're not laying the groundwork first and showing people how you value them, you're going to lose credibility before you ever start the meeting. So really, really remember that. Be likable, be encouraging, be consistent, and be intentional with your work. So guys, I wish we had an hour for every single one of those topics that we talked about. And who knows, we might do this again and just talk about people management for an entire hour. I had a wonderful time learning from both of you. Really appreciate your time. And I'll tell you what, before we go, Scott, Cody, will you share just verbally or put in the chat your email addresses, how these folks can get in touch with you if they want to talk to you more in depth? So everybody on the chat, be looking for that. These guys are going to put their email addresses if you want to talk to them and learn more. You want to get their help. I'm sure they'd be glad to talk with you. And we appreciate all of your time. Cody and Scott, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate the time. And it's great being with you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate being here. And it was great to be with you too, Scott.
Awesome. You guys have a great day. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you, everybody.
Bye.